Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back after lunch. And thank you very much for coming here. I'm really happy to finally be able to present something in front of people after such a long time of working on it. And it's also very nice to see so many different types of people from academia and also from practice and policy. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here today and to show you some of our initial findings. And then also to get some of your reflections, where you think it comes from or why you face those challenges and how you actually solve them as social enterprises. We at Hertie in Berlin, we look mainly at the work package on governance. So what is governance? Governance are the structures, systems, and processes concerned with ensuring the overall direction, control, and accountability of an organization. So very broad. And why is it so important for social enterprises? Because it potentially helps them to balance the multiple goals that we heard about also before in the discussion and to remain accountable to multiple stakeholders. So, for example, to the capital providers and also to the beneficiaries. What I'm going to show you today are two dimensions of governance we looked at. So the first one is board governance that we all know about as a key mechanism of governance, and then I'm also going to look a bit into transparency and reporting and how social enterprises actually measure and report the social performance. So in terms of board governance, we find that most social enterprises across all countries do have a board, 86%. But then we went on and asked them what was the reason you set up a board? Why did you do that? And then 80% of all organizations said, yeah, because we had to do so. It was required by the legal form we have, or there was a funder who asked us to set up a board. And only 20% of the organizations said we actually have a board because we wanted to have external feedback or we wanted to balance the needs of our multiple stakeholders. So that was something that I found pretty surprising because you would think you could make use of the structures and actually it doesn't seem that a lot of the social enterprises do it when they first found the board. Then we also looked at what the main functions of the boards are across the countries, and we see that most of the social enterprises actually do what also for-profit, or what we know from for-profit boards, they do control and strategy mainly. And what we found much less was actually boards that engage in service functions. So for example, getting resources for the organization or establishing external relationships. We also looked at who actually sits on the board. And we see that the majority of the boards are actually quite homogeneous in terms of the people who are on there. So it's mainly either business people or social sector people. But we found not so many that have a mix of people and also not so many that have, for example, beneficiaries on the board. That might be, or that is said to be a practice that you could actually feed more of the target group needs into strategic decision making. And actually, the UK boards were those who had most diversity on the boards. So in the case studies we also went on and tried to understand, okay, how do organizations actually get more out of governance? And we find that some organizations actually do adapt the way they deal with boards and actually think about, okay, what does the organization need at this point of development and who do we want to have sitting on the board? And so there might be, for example, a change from a more strategic or from a more control function to a more strategic function, or sorry, my voice. And there might also be a change from a more resource provision function to a more control function. What we also saw is that not all governance happens on the board. So you might have a board that does a lot of control, but you might also build on other mechanisms to actually get feedback from people and build relationships. So we saw that some organizations work with committees of beneficiaries, for example, or they also appoint people at boundary positions that actually mediate between beneficiary needs and the board. Then the second point we looked at is transparency and reporting. And yeah, we found that actually most of the organizations do track their social performance and report it. 64% in total, 97% in Portugal. I think the Portuguese entrepreneur is gone, I think. And 48 in Spain, that was low. And it was also interesting for us in Germany because social sector organizations are often said to be not very transparent. And actually more than 70% of the social enterprises in Germany do measure and report their impact. So then we went on and looked, okay, who do they actually report it to? And we see that a majority of 40% reports to the capital providers. But interestingly, when you look at who the organizations feel accountable to, it's much less. So we heard a lot also in the cases of organizations saying, oh, well, we pretty much measure what we are asked to measure by our capital providers, and it doesn't really have to be linked to what the actual needs of our organization are. So we just try to deliver to make sure we get the funding and make the capital providers happy. What do they report? Mainly we see that they report numbers, so numbers of beneficiaries. And interestingly for Sweden, we had the lowest number of people, of organizations actually measuring numbers, but more qualitative measures, and you also talked about that before. So a lot of the social entrepreneurs in the interviews also said, actually, we're not so sure if this reflects actually our work and what we are doing and the value of it, but more a number of that may be comparable across different organizations, but that might not be what the core of our activities is. So we also went with the cases and looked a bit more into it. And we saw that actually a lot of organizations do have ways to measure qualitatively, what we also heard before. And I think you also said, yeah, it gives us an understanding of what we actually do and what people need and how they advance or where they may advance a bit less. So it really helps the organizations to also develop further and maybe innovate and understand what the beneficiary needs are. And another interesting thing we found also in Germany is that organizations might just opt out of particular funding arrangements. So they might say, okay, I mean, we have to do so much for them, and it's so far away from the other reporting we do. We just stick with 1 or 2 funders, and through that kind of lower the amount of work we have to put into that. And yeah, I'm really interested in what your experiences are in that area. It was just a short input to show you what we got from the organizations we talked with. And yeah, I'm looking forward to your reflections and your challenges and solutions. Thank you.
Simon, can I invite you to...
Oh no, keep it up, it's great. Yes. So thanks very much for inviting me. I'm just going to sort of been asked to reflect from my experience of being a chief exec of a small not-for-profit with a very big board and now chair of a community regeneration charity and a couple of other things. So first of all, thank you. The research is really useful, and it's so great as a social entrepreneur when you look at these and think, I'm not alone. That's quite normal. So thank you for looking at that. So to reflect on how, in my experience, the organisations I've been involved with or involved with now, how's this feel? So the organisations I've been involved with, actually, I've been very fortunate. They have a mixture of people on the board who help with compliance, but also help with business development. My reflection is you need both, and actually they're different types of personality. Don't try and get someone who's really good at business development and being entrepreneurial to do compliance. It just doesn't work. And our experience, actually the hardest, especially when people want to join boards of exciting organisations, it's to get the compliance people in, to get a good finance person, a good HR person, to let the organisation run and let the other people do the sort of so-called exciting bit. So definitely need a mixture of both. Diversity, inclusion, absolutely. It's a big issue, and I think the research is very sensible in saying, looking at other ways to get people's views. It is actually quite dangerous to have one person on the board who's a beneficiary and then use that one person to inform all your thinking. You wouldn't do it for any other issue. You would get trend information, you'd get a whole lot of stuff. So don't go for the sort of tokenism bit, go for how are we going to get people's views. One of the things that we found useful when at Sustainability West Midlands is a young director's role. If you look on the website, there's a case study, and that's been really interesting. It changed the dynamic of the board because that young director was a training position. It made the other board members behave and actually do more because they're being shown up by a very young, enthusiastic graduate. And actually, if you think about another outcome, if all of your boards had a training position, immediately after a couple of years, you'd have more people to draw from. So that whole is quite an easy win. All public sector organisations, in my opinion, should be having a training position on their boards, or publicly funded organisations. Reporting. Yeah, this is tricky, and what I have found helpful, and it links to the governance bit, is having a business plan in place, maybe a 3-year one or 1-year review, and use that for a couple of things. One, use an annual skills audit to ask your board, are you the right team? Have we got the right skills? And then it depersonalises things. And over time, you can get people moving off because they've done their role, and you get new people on. And it's all about what can you do to help the business. And that's very, very helpful, having got scars on my back, having gone through some discussions. But having that quite clear framework, doing a business plan, using an audit once a year, saying, have we got the right skills, those internal skills, those external skills? Do we need fresh people on? So you've got some constantly new people coming on and off, but not too often. So that's been helpful. And then using that structure as well, the reporting, it's been very helpful. So some of the organisations I've been involved with, the business plan has, these are our social objectives, the mission objectives, people into training. And then the other bit is, these are our business objectives, our HR, our finance. So quite clear, that's what we're about, that's how we run our business. And then reflecting that in what we call a balanced scorecard, high-level stuff. How are we doing on our mission? How are we doing as a business? And again, having our board meetings structure that so it reinforces the board members you're interested about the mission and the business. So those are some sort of things we've learnt. To conclude, we quite like using pictures with the project I'm involved in the moment, Springfield project, and our symbol is a tree, and we found that very helpful when you think about your organisational structure and governance. The roots are your values and your direction, the trunk is the boring bit, the structures, the staff, and the branches are the services you provide. And ideally, as your board matures, you should be focusing on the roots and the trunk and letting your staff constantly adapt and deliver different services. But if your board isn't concentrating on those things, then you are going to get trouble in the end. You're not going to produce lasting sort of fruit and benefit. So that's a couple of reflections. Thank you ever so much. And yeah, I've recognised a lot of those things. Thanks.
So we got 5 minutes for a brief Q&A. So maybe first question from the room, if there are any. Just either Simon or Miriam. Yes, over there. Oh, right. Please state your name and organisation first, please.
Toby Chambers at Goldsmiths. How to empower. You mentioned kind of the young kind of directors board, because I think there's a lot of potential talent out there, but a lot of people, particularly if they might have the skill level, particularly maybe a degree, that they assume that someone with a degree has better expertise. So how do we empower those people that might have some really great skills but don't actually feel comfortable at actually putting their hand up? And
yeah, thanks, Simon.
I think it's a really great question, and I think my answer is our board struggled with it, saying if we have that position, is it someone who's just out of education or is it someone early career? And in the end, the board decided to go for someone who actually had a degree, was a couple of years into their role, because that was felt the best balance of them actually being able to contribute and benefit back. So it doesn't help people who've got other skills who also could contribute. But I suppose my response is if boards at the moment aren't even doing the easy thing in terms of getting graduates with 2 years experience into a training position, get them in and then make the case later on for getting sort of apprenticeships or others in. It was seen as a step too far for our board, frankly, to get someone without any formal education. So I think it's a really good point, but we certainly couldn't go that far at that stage.
Right. There's a question over there. Yep.
Roger Spear, Open University. I did some work on governance in social enterprise a few years ago, and we came across one very good social enterprise, and the chief executive said, we didn't think the board was up to the job, so we fired them all, and got a new one. And paradoxically, it seems like the chief executive is probably the most important person in relation to developing a good board. I just wanted to see whether there are any comments about that.
Having been a chief exec and a chair, I would agree. I think that there's two issues. The chief exec, in my experience, needs to be able to have a good relationship with the chair and view the board as part of the team. If that relationship doesn't work, or the board are not working, as the chair's not making the team work, you've got problems. The other issue is, and I've been on this situation as well, it's also the role of the chair and the board. If a chief exec is not performing, you are going to have to go in and deal with that as well. So it is a very tricky relationship, and I'd agree, if it's not working, something needs to be done about it.
Any other questions from the room?
Thank you. So it's a question about the research, actually. I was not surprised to see, but it's a shame to see the social impact reporting responses that organisations are feeling that they're collecting reporting just to talk back to their funders. Did you see in your analysis any organisations that are collecting social impact metrics because they're using them to drive their business?
I think what I presented here was one part, so it's not that they only report to the capital providers, but we also find that a lot of them, for example, report to the general public, that there's a lot, so there is actually reporting to different stakeholder groups, and we also looking into that more in depth to see what are the patterns, like what are actually, but what we do see is that there's less reporting downwards to beneficiaries and to also paying customers. And I think that maybe it's two different things, right? You have on the one side, you have the performance measurement as such, and on the other side, you have the reporting. And I think if you have a closer relationship, for example, with your beneficiaries, you might not always have to formally report as you, for example, do have to do it with capital providers. But I mean, that's also something we're trying to look into more in depth now, what the arrangements are and what the consequences actually are for how the organization operates. So what are the consequences for improving services, for example, for innovation and all those aspects.
I'm going to get the last question from our Me Too app. So the question is to Simon. What is your experience of including beneficiaries in your boards? Also, what you have seen from your role in the West Midlands?
So I'll go with the charity, social enterprise charity I'm involved with at the moment. I think our beneficiaries for the Springfield project tend to be Muslim women who don't speak English very well, who are accessing our services. So what we do is we try and do, certainly once a year, a big push. We have called it Consultation Week, where we actually have people getting alongside people working with and having conversations and then gathering that information up, which is fed back to our board in a particular way, saying, this is what we seem to be doing well, this isn't working so well. So I think that is what we've tried to do. We've also sort of thought about setting up an advisory board, and that's early stages where it's not the main board business, which frankly is a bit boring, but actually it's more around things like adult services or the nursery and things like that, and we invite people who've been through that service to come and give their experience. In terms of the West Midlands, I don't know. I just know it is difficult, and my concern is it looks good to have someone on your board who fits that category, but if you're not supporting them and you're not helping them, it is. I'm being honest with you. I've been on another board. I won't say which one it was. There's a review that said we weren't diverse, so the board recruited a black woman. They didn't support her, and actually it was awful. So I think it's being confident of saying getting the voice. How are you going to get the voices you need, and how are you going to be listening to them seriously and not go for tokenism?
All right. Well, thanks to Miriam and Simon.